Okay, this is going to be a short tutorial about config files. I've been working in Modo for a long time and I've never really even dealt with config files. I just kind of overlooked them and glazed over them, but I've been needing to do some layout work where I create custom layouts and make sure that everyone on the team has the same preferences and the same tool sets and all that. And so I started looking at the config files and reading up on the documentation a bit. And so what I'm going to show you here is kind of how the config files work and how you can use them to your benefit, especially when you have a team that's going to be using Modo to do something so that everybody's consistent. Now you'll notice that in this window here I've got on my C drive, and I'm in Windows, this is in users berry app data roaming Luxology. And I've got all these config files, and the one that gives a config file is basically a master preferences file. So anything that you set up in Modo, it stores that information in your config file so that next time you open it, it's there again. So the config file is a big deal. Now this is like my 601 config file, and these are previous licenses and all that kind of stuff. But basically you'll just see this Modo 601, Modo 701 CFG file. Now this is my old 701, and what I did is I just renamed it so that when I start Modo up, it's going to be as if I just installed it fresh, nothing, no changes to it. So I'm going to go ahead and start it up. Okay. And I'm going to start Modo up, and it's going to load up. And the first thing it's going to do is it's going to say, do you want to check for updates? You can change this in your preferences. I'm going to say no. Do you want to send statistics? No. So now I've got a vanilla version of Modo that's just strictly as if I just installed it. I use Maya navigation, and this is also the trackball rotation, and so this is wrong to me. If I middle mouse click, it rotates the camera this way. Right click is like a click drag, it's the Luxology default. Okay, so I don't like that. So the first thing I'm going to do is go into my system preferences, and I'm going to go down to OpenGL, and I'm going to uncheck trackball rotation and then say override viewport level trackball option. So this makes sure that every viewport no longer uses trackball. Okay, so that's the first thing I'm going to do. The other thing that I'm going to do is go into final rendering, and I'm going to turn off the display gamma affecting color swatches and stuff because I want it to be at just 1.0 sRGB. Okay. The other thing I'm going to do is go to remapping, and I'm going to change my input presets to Maya, and then I'm going to say no for this, and I am good. So those are all my presets. So now I can use Maya navigation. Okay. And if I go to my preset browser and I go to colors, where are we here? Colors. Now these are full sRGB coloring. If I go back to system preferences and I change the rendering and I say affect that and affect that, and then I close it and I go out and come back in, you'll notice they're slightly more muted. And this is especially with other colors. The 2.2 gamma kind of doesn't give you the same color as the straight RGB. So if you have something that you're trying to match, like an RGB value from Photoshop or Illustrator or something like that, they won't match unless you turn those off. So I'm going to go back to my system preferences and uncheck those. Okay, so I'm just going to do that, and then go brushes, colors. Okay, so all that information gets stored in a config file. So I'm going to go back to model, and I've got all this stuff. So the first thing I want to do is normally, see, all that stuff is now saved in my Modo 701 config. But there may be some things that I don't want saved in there that I want to share with other people, some things that I don't need other people to have that I just want to have personally. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split these config files into separate config files so that other people can use them. So the first thing I'm going to do is go File, Config Export, and I'm going to go to, instead of this configs folder, I'm going to go to one that I set up just to store them. I'm going to go to here, demos configs, and I'm going to call this one input mapping Maya. Okay, and then I'm going to save it there, but I don't want all of it. I just want the input mappings, and I don't want to append to another file, and I don't want to import it. So I'm just going to say OK. Now when I go to that config file, it's right here, and if I double click it, you'll notice it has all those instructions just for the input mapping in that config file. Makes it really nice. Okay, so I'm going to go back to Modo now. I also want all my preferences. So I'm going to go File, Config Export, and I'm going to go back to that place. Training Modo configs, and I'm going to call it System Prefs. Okay, save. And I don't want it here, I want just preferences. Okay, say OK. Now if I go look in that folder, I've got System Prefs, and it's just basically the things that I have changed from default. So it's the trackball rotation that I changed, and the gamma applied to color swatches is set to 0, so it's off. Okay, so those are the only two things that I really needed to change. So I've got my input mapping, my Maya, and all my system prefs. And like if you turn on network rendering, it'll be here, all that kind of stuff. Okay. So that's pretty much it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to close down Modo, and I'm going to go back to here, and you'll notice it created a 701 config. I'm going to delete that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down and I'm going to start up Modo again. And you'll notice it thinks I have a clean install. There's nothing that's telling it what to do. So I'm going to say no, I'm going to say no, and you'll notice I have the trackball rotation again. I don't have Maya navigation. If I go to system prefs, final rendering, you'll notice those are still picked. Okay, so I have a clean install of Maya. So I'm going to shut down. What I'm going to do is in this configs folder, oh, you saw that created right there when I shut it down. In this configs folder, I'm going to open that up, and then I'm going to go to the ones that I saved, copy them, go back over and paste them. Now these are going to be default config files that always get loaded when Modo loads. So now I'm going to go back and go Modo. There we go. Now if I rotate, I don't have trackball rotation. I have Maya navigation with left mouse, middle mouse, and right mouse. And if I go to system preferences, final rendering, those are unchecked. And remapping, I've got Maya stuff, and then OpenGL, I've got no trackball rotation and override. So those configs, when they're loaded at default, when they're sitting in that configs file or config folder, they will be loaded at default, and I don't have to put those in my main 701 config file. That one can just stay as it is. Okay, and that way I can share those config files with others, and then they will have the exact same settings. So that's it for config files. Hopefully if I've done something wrong, somebody will catch me on it. But I found this to be hugely helpful when you're working with teams of people using Modo and you need consistency across the board. So that's it.